Welcome to a new and exciting story from Nordic Noir Stories. A Note in the Snow. Chapter 1. The Black Garbage Bag. It was the Kaamos, the polar night, and Björnsdal lay buried. The snow had been falling ceaselessly for 4 days, an unforgiving blanket over the small town that already seemed abandoned by the rest of the world. The iron mine had been closed for years, and now, in mid-December, the few hundred remaining souls of Björnsdal lived in a permanent twilight, a grey-black haze that blurred the line between day and night. The constant darkness created a sense of oppressive disorientation. Thomas Nyman looked outside. Not that there was anything to see. His wooden cabin, once a superintendent's lodge for the abandoned mine, stood a few kilometers outside the town, at the edge of the forest. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic cracking of branches under the weight of the snow, and occasionally the distant howling of the wind across the frozen Björnsdal, the dark lake. He was used to the silence. He needed the silence. It was the only thing that had taken him in after he had lost everything. Thomas, 50 years old and with shoulders as broad as a chest, was now only a shadow of the driven chief inspector he had been 20 years earlier. His face was furrowed by the cold and the guilt, and his grey hair stuck out untidily from beneath a worn wool cap. He wore thick, soiled work trousers and a soot-stained jacket. The police identification had been in a metal box in the attic for 2 decades, where he occasionally dusted it off, as if guarding a dead man. Today was December 15th. It was the day. 20 years ago, on this very date, Thomas should have picked up his daughter from a Christmas market in Luleå. But he had been immersed in the file of Vestergaard, the 15-year-old who had mysteriously disappeared from Björnsdal, and he had ignored his wife's call. By the time he looked up, his family was gone, and Elin was never found. Today, Thomas was cutting wood. That was his penance. Hard work until there were no more thoughts, only the pure physical battle with the axe and the timber. He hadn't let the stove fires go out since September. After filling the woodshed, he walked towards his pickup, an old Volvo he used for his forest ranger duties. He still had a load of logs to deliver to Björnsdal's last functioning sawmill. He pulled the driver's door open. That's when he saw it. On the windscreen wiper, clipped against the ice, was a small, folded piece of paper. It wasn't white but yellow, the discoloured paper of an old receipt or a forgotten notepad. It contrasted sharply with the white snow and the black rubber. Thomas stopped. He hated surprises. In Björnsdal, any disruption to the monotonous routine was a threat. He pulled off his glove, the cold steel of the door screeching under his bare palm. Carefully, he picked up the note. It was so thin, it felt as if it might disintegrate. He unfolded it with slow, deliberate movements. Inside was a single sentence, written in neat, old-fashioned handwriting with ink that seemed faded. She loved purple, and the lies remain unresolved. Thomas's breath hitched, the hot air instantly turning into a cloud of ice. Purple. During the investigation into Vestergaard 20 years ago, there was one detail Thomas alone knew and had never included in his official report. The night before her disappearance, Elin had told her mother she had lost a purple wool scarf, a scarf gifted to her by her grandmother. The detail had been deemed irrelevant at the time. A girl losing a scarf. Thomas had done nothing with it. It was a secret, a purple shadow over a black case. And now it was here, in his hands, 20 years later. Who the hell, Thomas muttered, his voice hoarse from the unaccustomed silence. He looked around. The quiet was now suffocating. Only the cabin, the snow-covered trees, the pickup. No one could have seen this. The road hadn't been ploughed in days. The snow around his car was undisturbed, save for his own tracks. Someone must have been here shortly after Thomas left the house for his logging, or worse, during the night. Someone who knew Thomas's movements. Someone who knew, and the lies remain unresolved. The sentence was a jab in his ribs. The Vestergaard case had been closed with the conclusion that Elin had run away, a runaway presumed lost in the wilderness. But Thomas had always known there were lies. The family had lied. The community had lied. Everyone had a reason to see her gone, to stay silent. He tucked the note into the inner pocket of his jacket, close to his heart, as if it were a knife he wanted to conceal. This was not a threat. This was an invitation, or perhaps a conviction. Thomas climbed into his pickup. The engine started with a loud, reluctant cough that shattered the morning quiet. He let the truck warm up, his gaze constantly fixed on the dense trees along the road. He was a forest ranger. He was not supposed to dig into the past anymore, but the perpetrator, or the witness, had just dragged Thomas Nyman out of his grave. He put the truck in gear and drove, carefully entering the fresh snow, heading down the unpaved road towards Björnsdal. The frozen, rusted sign by the main road read, "Björnsdal, we stand by you, come what may," a sarcastic slogan. As he passed the first abandoned houses of the town, which looked like holes in a rotting jaw, Thomas knew he wasn't just going to deliver a load of wood. He was going to turn the town upside down again. The truth was cold, but the snow made it perfect. Chapter 2. The Scar of Björnsdal. The drive from the forest ranger's cabin to Björnsdal was short, but it felt like a journey through time. Björnsdal did not look like a town that was alive, but like a scar that refused to heal. The town had been built around the iron mine, and now that the mine's breath had been taken away, everything deteriorated into a state of frozen inertia. The houses were a jumble of weathered wooden barracks and drab concrete apartment buildings. Many windows were now boarded up or shattered, their empty, dark stares the only witnesses to the Kaamos. Even the snow here seemed greyer, tainted by the soot and rust from the underground. Thomas skillfully navigated the Volvo through the shallow ruts. The weight of the logs on his trailer and the weight of the note in his inner pocket felt equally heavy. When he parked the pickup at the entrance of the Björnsdal Träindustri, the sawmill, he knew he had to keep his face neutral. To the locals, Thomas Nyman was the lost man, the ex-policeman who failed to find their children, and who now, as punishment, chopped their trees. Ola Persson, the owner and foreman, emerged. Ola was a giant of a man with the dry, tough skin of someone who had spent his life in the elements. He wore a yellow, high-visibility vest and always looked angry, a virtue in Björnsdal. "Nyman," Ola grumbled, offering no greeting. His gaze skimmed the trailer. "You're late. The machines have been idle for half an hour." "The snow," Thomas replied, his voice flat. "The path needed ploughing." "You don't plough paths, you cut. Unload it. And fast. You know we're not busy, but the state woodsman is the least productive link." Ola was already walking away, towards his shed. Thomas began loosening the tie-down straps. The sharp sound of the metal snapping in the cold was the only noise besides the crunching of the frozen mud under his soles. He needed Ola. Ola was a walking archive of Björnsdal, He had grown up here, had seen Elin Vestergaard grow up, and had watched the town implode. When the last log was unloaded, Thomas wiped the sawdust from his sleeve and followed Ola into the small, dusty office shack. "I have some state forms for you," Thomas lied, "about new disposal regulations. Do you have 5 minutes?" Ola sighed but crossed his arms. 3. Thomas stayed close to the stove, the heat feeling rough against his cheeks. He opened his fake paperwork and then began casually. "I was driving through the old district, the town relocation zone. I saw that the Vestergaard house is still empty. Do you think they'll ever sell it after all this time?" Ola's eyes, normally so dull, sharpened. "Why would you ask that?" "Just thinking. Old business. It's the 17th today, Ola. Elin's disappearance anniversary. It always comes back." Ola's mouth tightened into a hard line. "No one talks about Elin. Thomas, for 2 decades, we've let her rest. She ran away. A stupid kid who fled a stupid town. We have enough real worries here." "Really?" Thomas ignored the barb. "Like, for example, the last 2, the Eriksson girls. They ran away too, didn't they? 2 years ago, 21-year-old Sarah Eriksson had disappeared. Last year, her younger sister Emma, 18. The official conclusion from the regional police was that the sisters had lost hope in Björnsdal and headed south for a better life. They were adults. No crime. Ola spat on the floor next to the stove. "That's what happens when you turn off the lights on a community, Thomas. The rats run away. Sarah was a user. Emma was a dreamer. They're in Stockholm, or in the ground. No one here cares. The police wrote it all down and left, just like you did back then." Thomas felt the hot, familiar sting of anger. They had family. They had friends. "And they had secrets," Ola hissed, "like everyone else. Go home, Thomas, and cut the trees." It was the perfect send-off for a man who knew his place. But Thomas Nyman no longer knew his place. The note had ended his exile. As Thomas left the sawmill and started his pickup, he saw her. She was standing outside the rusted former Björnsdal police station, which now served as a shared post for the local fire department and the one remaining village agent, Malin Skjöld. She was young, perhaps early 30s, and her dark uniform looked far too large for her slender frame. She was talking on a mobile phone, her back to him, and she looked like the only straight line in the bent, snowy wasteland of the town. Thomas had met her 2 years ago, and she had regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and unconcealed disdain. She was frustrated, a university-educated officer, tethered to a dead town with only paperwork and drunken arguments counting as crime. Thomas drove slowly past. He needed her help, but he couldn't show her the note. Malin would immediately have him arrested for obstructing an investigation. Or worse, she would dismiss the note as a sick joke and call her regional chief. He parked the Volvo around the corner from the police station, pretending to check the chains. As he feigned kneeling, he observed Malin. She hung up, sighed deeply, and disappeared back inside the dark wooden shack. Now was the moment. In his heyday as a detective, Thomas had maintained a secret micro-archive in the basement of the station. A storage cupboard behind the boiler room, secured with his own padlock. Here he kept the particulars that didn't fit into the official files. Photos that were too gruesome, testimonies that were too unreliable, and his personal notes on the hidden dynamics of the community. Elin Vestergaard's file was there, and he needed it. Thomas made a decision. He would abandon the sawmill and his pickup. He could explain that later. He walked along the sidewall of the station. The snow crunched loudly under his soles. The back door, leading to the storage area, had once been secured with a modern lock. Now, with budget cuts, it was just a simple latch. Thomas's heart began to beat harder than it had in 20 years. He was no longer a police officer. This was breaking and entering. He pulled out his set of keys, the same heavy keyring he used for his cabin, and searched for the one small brass-coloured key he had kept, a key to a life he had lost. With trembling fingers, he inserted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting for him. Thomas pulled the door open. Cold, musty air of wet concrete and stagnation greeted him. He was back. Chapter 3. The Purple Ghost. The basement of the Björnsdal station was cold in a way that penetrated the bones, a colder, more pervasive dampness than the healthy frost above ground. The scent was that of forgotten documents, mould, and the subtle, metallic tang of the nearby boiler. Thomas gently closed the door behind him. The darkness was nearly absolute. Only a faint shaft of light penetrated a small spiderweb-covered window high near the ceiling. He felt at home in this place, which disgusted him. He pulled out his sturdy LED flashlight and activated it. The beam sliced through the dust, revealing the chaotic storage area. Broken desks, outdated uniforms on rusty hangers, and piles of evidence from cases long since closed. At the back of the room, next to the huge, humming boiler that was miraculously still functioning, stood the wooden storage cabinet. It was a bulky, green piece, and it was the only cabinet with a heavy, old-fashioned padlock. Thomas's heart pounded, a drumming rhythm against the silence of the basement. He grabbed the second, smaller key from his ring, a silver-coloured one he had stolen years ago from his former chief's desk. It clicked open. The doors of the micro-archive swung open with a long, creaking sigh. Inside lay the papers and boxes, organised exactly as Thomas had left them, by chronology, not name. He first had to find the correct date, December 2005. His fingers, stiff from the cold and anticipation, pulled a dusty cardboard archive box from the shelf. The letters on the side were scrawled in his own hurried black marker handwriting. Vestergaard, E. Closed. Undesired. Thomas placed the box on an overturned desk and pulled the file open. It was like stepping into a vacuum. The contents smelled of the past, of the stench of failure that he had carried with him for 20 years. The file was thinner than he remembered. Most of the evidence was in the regional archive where it belonged. These were Thomas's additions, his secrets, his mistakes. He began to quickly flip through the handwritten notes. Page 1. The Vestergaard's Lies. Thomas had noted back then that Eilín's parents, Anders and Ingrid, had accepted the conclusion that their daughter had run away with remarkable speed. Accepted too easily. Not despair, but relief. What were they hiding about the period before her disappearance? He remembered the coldness in their home, not the grief for a missing child, but the fear that something about themselves might be discovered. Page 2. The witness no one wanted to hear. An unofficial statement from a then 12-year-old boy, Linus, who claimed he had seen a car driving near the edge of the woods, close to the school where Eilín was last seen that evening, the 15th. The car was dark and old, with a broken headlight. The testimony had been dismissed as unreliable, the fantasy of a child. Thomas had circled the boy's name in red, Linus Renvall. And then, on the third page, he found his own careful notation, dating back 2 days after the disappearance. Detail: Aileen was extremely attached to a purple scarf, hand-knitted by grandmother. She claimed she lost it on the 14th on the way to school, but offered no further explanation. It seems a trivial detail, but her distress over its loss was disproportionate. Could be a trigger or a marker, not included in the main report. His flashlight trembled in his hand. She loved purple. The line from the note. The unknown sender knew this specific, forgotten detail. This confirmed what Thomas already feared. The person who wrote the note was either directly involved in the events of 20 years ago, or had access to Thomas's most intimate, unofficial thoughts. Thomas sat down on the dusty desk, the cold of the concrete seeping into his legs. He wasn't paranoid. He was being played. He took the yellow note from his inner pocket and compared it to the handwritten text in the file. The handwriting was completely different. Thomas's scribbles were chaotic and agitated. The note was neat and almost schoolmasterly. He realized he might not be searching for the culprit from 20 years ago, but for the person protecting or imitating the culprit. He flipped further to the last item in the box, an item he had almost wished to forget, a large black piece of plastic. This was a fragment of a black garbage bag tied with thin red string. It had been found a month after Eileen's disappearance, in a location far from where she was last seen, in the woods near the closed mine. The bag was empty, but the exterior bore traces of human blood. The DNA analysis at the time was inconclusive, too much contamination. But Thomas had kept the fragment. He remembered the atmosphere of that day, the fear that they would find a limb or a piece of clothing. They only found the bag. He inspected the bloodstain on the plastic under the beam of his flashlight. It was brown and nearly invisible. Then his eyes fell on a small, handwritten sticker he had attached to the string. Found by P. Skuld. Thomas frowned. P. Skuld? He hadn't heard the name in 20 years. P. Skuld was the local village officer of Björnsdal at the time, a man Thomas had respected, one of the few who also believed the case was not a runaway. But P. Skuld had left the police 2 years ago, and his daughter, Malin Skuld, was the village agent now sitting above him on the ground floor. A cold shiver ran down Thomas's spine. Was this a coincidence? Had Marlin's father found the garbage bag, and had Marlin sent the notes? Thomas suddenly felt an immense rush. He had to copy this file and get out of here before Marlin started her patrol. But first, the Eriksson girls. He reached for another box in the micro archive, one he had added more recently, after his retirement and before he moved to the cabin. The title, Disappeared, Ignore. Inside he found the brief, unofficial files of Sarah and Emma Eriksson. Their disappearances were officially non-criminal, but Thomas had found something else, a few newspaper clippings he had saved. Sarah Eriksson had worked at Björnsdal's last local bar and was seen talking to an old man with a purple hat on the night of her disappearance. This had been dismissed as the drunken fabrication of a witness. Emma Eriksson disappeared a week after being fired from Ole Persson's sawmill, the man Thomas had just spoken to. Thomas Thomas looked at the yellow note. She loved purple, and the lies remain unresolved. Purple was no longer just a detail of Elin. Purple was a signature, and the lies were connected. Thomas quickly photographed all the crucial documents with his mobile phone. The purple scarf notation, the testimony of Linus Renvall, and the details about the Eriksson girls. He put the original yellow note back into his jacket pocket. He placed the black box of Elin Vestergaard back on the shelf, exactly as he had found it. He locked the padlock. The basement door waited. The truth was not buried in the snow, but in the paper and oblivion of this cold, dirty basement. And now Thomas had a name he had to look up first. Linus Renvall, the 12-year-old witness, now a man of 32. Chapter 4. The son of the witness. Thomas slipped out of the basement and carefully pulled the door shut, the lock clicking with a soft yet definitive sound. It felt strange. In his youth, sneaking into a police station was the highest crime. Now, it was a necessity to find the truth. He hurried past the side of the building, away from the parked Volvo, and through the narrow alleys that Björnsdal had once used as a refuge for drunkards. The streets were deserted. The wind had died down, and the sound of his own footsteps was alarmingly loud in the snow. He now had two things to do: find the current whereabouts of Linus Renvall, devise a subtle reason to talk to Malin Skjold. Linus Renvall was the boy who, 20 years ago, had seen a dark old car with a broken tail light. If he still lived in Björnsdal, it was a miracle. Thomas hid in the doorway of an abandoned clothing store, pulled out his mobile phone, and opened the photo of the police file. He searched the National Population Registers, a service he had access to as a forest ranger through the local government, but rarely used. The phone connected slowly. The data connection in Björnsdal, like the rest of the town, was dying. After a frustrating minute, a result appeared. Renvall, Linus A., 32. He no longer lived in the Norrbotten region. The address was an apartment in Luleå, a 4-hour drive to the south. Thomas swallowed his disappointment. The truth was never right under your nose in Björnsdal. Luleå, a day trip, round trip, that could wait. First, he had to make contact with the local police. He looked for Malin Skjold's official phone number. He hesitated. What was his excuse? The timber delivery was the only official business he had in town. He decided on a direct, business-like approach. No lies about logging. Only the guilt. He walked back to his Volvo. His fingers were frozen, but the adrenaline kept him warm. He got in and turned the heater to the maximum setting. While the engine warmed up, Thomas typed a text message. Don't call. A text gave her time to react, time to analyze. To Monsieur Skjold, Björnsdal Police. From Thomas Nyman. I am at my truck now. I found an old report regarding the disappearance of Elin Vestergaard, 2005, that I believe you need to see. It concerns an error in the original archiving. I don't want to alarm anyone. Can you meet me here in 10 minutes? Alone. He sent it. It was a gamble. Thomas admitted he had made a mistake. It was the only way to lure Malin. She would see his request as an opportunity, catching the disgraced detective making a blunder. Thomas waited. The minutes ticked by to the rhythm of the cold engine. After 7 minutes, his phone vibrated. From Monsieur Skjold. Why are you contacting me and not the regional chief? I'm coming. 5 minutes. Exactly the reaction he expected. skepticism, but curiosity. And Thomas stepped out of the pickup. He walked to the back of the truck and opened the tailgate, as if searching for a toolbox. He didn't want to look like he was waiting for her. Then she appeared. Marlene Scholl drove around the corner in her compact grey patrol car, the only one in Björnsdal, and parked next to Thomas's pickup with a controlled, scraping stop. She stepped out and slammed the door with a sharp clack that pierced the silence. Her face was young, but her eyes were old. She had the dark, worried look of someone who had lived too long in the Kaamos. "Nyman," she said, her voice low and official. She wore her pistol in a holster on her hip, a constant, unnecessary weight in a town without crime. "Why in God's name are you digging into a closed 20-year-old case?" "I'm not digging, Officer Scholl," Thomas said, his gaze calm. He used her title. "I'm correcting an error, and you are the only one with the authority to reopen the case." He took the yellow note from his inner pocket. "Last night," Thomas began, looking her in the eye, "I found a disturbing note tucked under the windshield wiper of my car at my cabin." Marlene looked at the slip of paper, her eyebrows furrowed. "Under your wiper? Anonymous, then?" Marlene's skepticism seemed to waver momentarily. She looked from his hands, which held the note firmly, to his hard face. "Let me see it," she ordered. "No," Thomas said calmly. "Not yet. Not until you tell me about your father." The abruptness of the turn struck her. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "What does my father have to do with this?" "Officer Scholl," Thomas said, lowering his voice to a bare whisper. "Your father, P. Scholl, was the only officer who believed Aileen hadn't run away. He found a black garbage bag with blood traces a month after the disappearance. I just saw the fragment in the basement. Tell me, what did he tell you about that bag? Did he ever speak about the Vestergaard case?" The mention of her father's name, combined with the detail about the garbage bag, hit her like a blow. Marlene's stance of professional detachment broke. A deep, old pain appeared in her eyes. "My father left the force because that case broke him, Nyman," she replied, her voice now as soft and raw as his. "He never discussed the details, but he told me one thing once, when I decided to join the police." She looked over her shoulder at the deserted alleyway. "He said Björnsdal was just a thin layer of ice, and that if you dig too deep, you fall onto something you don't want to see. He said Eileen's killer still lived in town, and that the entire community knew it. That's why he left." Thomas stared at her, his own guilt echoing in her words. "And why did you stay?" "Because I want to see what he didn't dare to see," Marlene said fiercely. She pointed at his hands. "Show me that note, Thomas. Share your purple ghost with me, now." Thomas Nyman nodded slowly. He felt a reluctant, yet necessary partnership emerging in the cold, grey darkness of Björnsdal. "Fine," he said. "The note implies a connection between Aileen and the disappearances of Sarah and Emma Eriksson. It's about a signature." He handed her the note while holding her gaze. Marlene took the slip of paper carefully with her fingertips, as if it were radioactive. "And you think we should reopen the case because you received an anonymous note?" Her eyes scanned the text on the note, and she read aloud. "She loved purple, and the lies remain unresolved." Marlene looked at Thomas in disbelief. "You're saying an anonymous culprit is sending you a note about a 20-year-old cold case?" "I think the killer is starting a game with me after 20 years, and I intend to finish it. There is a name we both need to look up, Officer Schold. Linus Renvall, the boy who saw a car. He now lives in Luleå. As Marlin unfolded the note and her gaze scanned the mysterious schoolmasterly text, the manhunt began in the frozen heart of Sweden. Chapter 5. Luleå and the Broken Tail Light. The journey to Luleå was a test in silence and uncertainty. Thomas had shown Marlin the photo of the note, the text she read with a frown of intense concentration. She loved purple, and the lies remain unresolved. She'd carefully folded the note and placed it in a clear plastic bag, as if it were radioactive. Marlin drove her patrol car. Thomas sat silently in the passenger seat, the yellow note and the photos from the micro-archive feeling like a heavy burden in his pocket. It was the first time in years he had been in a police vehicle, and the smell of new plastic and formality contrasted sharply with his own scent of pine needles and smoke. They drove into the darkness. Even the polar night, the Kaamos, was not completely black. The sky glowed with a deep indigo blue, reflecting the vast amount of snow. After an hour and a half, Marlin broke the silence. "Why did you show me the note, Thomas? You could have given it to the regional police, officially reopening the case." Thomas looked out, where the trees flashed past in ghostly silhouettes. "Because I don't want the lies to be resolved, Marlin. I want them to be shattered. If the regional police get this, they will classify the case as cold again, and they will spend months in meetings, moving papers. I did that 20 years ago. We have to do this differently, directly. The perpetrator sent me a message. I'm sending one back." "And you're doing that by dragging me, the officer stuck in the police department's dump, along with you?" she asked, her voice tight. "You're the only one with authority in Björnsdal, and your father was broken by this case. That makes you the only one who wants to see the truth. And," he added, "if we find Linus Renvall, we need you for the official interrogation." Marlin fell silent. The silence was now a shared burden. They were an unlikely team, the exiled veteran and the inexperienced yet driven officer. They arrived in Luleå late in the afternoon, a city that lived and shone in stark contrast to the dead Björnsdal. Linus Renvall's address led them to a dreary apartment building in a residential area near the harbour. Marlin parked the car at a discreet distance. "I'll go alone. You wait in the car. If he recognises you, he'll shut down." Thomas nodded, though he hated it. He handed her the photo of the page in the file, the circled name, the date, and the description of the dark old car with a broken headlight. "Ask about the purple scarf, Marlin. Ask him what he remembers of that night, and why he thought his testimony was so insignificant that he never spoke of it again." Marlin got out and disappeared into the apartment building. Thomas waited. The minutes stretched out in the car. He watched the people walking along the street, wondering if the man sending the notes could also see him. After 15 minutes, Marlin returned. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a shock that Thomas immediately recognized as the confrontation with unexpected truth. She sat down, started the engine, and slowly drove away before speaking. "Linus Renvall," Marlin began, her voice low and tense, "is a broken man. He's an alcoholic, hasn't worked in years and lives alone. He was overwhelmed when I showed him my ID." "And the car?" Thomas asked. "The headlight, the scarf?" He didn't remember the scarf, but when I asked him about the car, he had a panic attack. Marlin took a deep breath. He said he didn't lie in 2005. He saw two things that evening near the woods: a dark car driving away at a certain speed, and an older man standing near the tree line watching, as if waiting for something. This was the breakthrough. Thomas leaned forward. And the headlight. The car, Marlin said, her gaze fixed on the road, was an old model Saab 900. He's sure of that, because his father had the same car. The broken taillight wasn't a mistake, Thomas. It was a broken taillight on the passenger side. But the police thought it was a headlight, Thomas noted. Exactly. He said the detective who questioned him, you, was distracted and wasn't listening. You were so focused on the car that you ignored the rest of his testimony. But that's not the worst part. Marlin stopped at a traffic light and turned to Thomas. He said the reason he never spoke about the car again was because he recognized that car a week later. The dark Saab 900 with the broken tail light. It was parked at the house of the only man he had seen standing near the woods that evening. Thomas held his breath. Who? Marlin's voice was barely audible. Ola Persson, the sawmill owner. The name Ola Persson hit like a sledgehammer. The gruff man Thomas had spoken to hours ago about a wood delivery. The man who had scoffed at the idea of reopening the case. The man who had urged Thomas to go home and cut trees. Furthermore, Ola Persson was the last employer of the disappeared Emma Eriksson, the second disappearance. The lies remain unresolved, Thomas whispered. He knew all along. Why didn't he say anything? Marlin asked disbelievingly. Because he didn't dare accuse Ola Persson, Thomas replied. Ola is the last man holding the community together in Björnsdal, Marlin. He is powerful, he is dangerous. And Linus was 12. He saw Ola with that car and kept silent for 20 years out of fear. And the purple scarf. That is the signal, Marlin. The link between Elin and the notes. But the culprit isn't Ola, or at least not the only one. Ola drove the car, maybe lured Elin away, but he didn't send the note. Marlin looked at him quizzically. How do you know that? Because the handwriting on the note is neat and schoolmasterly. Ola is a rough logger, not a penman. The person writing the notes is someone close to the killer. Someone who knows the details but lacks the courage to go to the police. Someone who knows about the scarf and about Ola's car. Someone who wants to reopen the case without exposing themselves. Thomas leaned back in his seat. The drive back to Björnsdal would feel different now. They were no longer driving to find the truth. They were driving to confront the killer and the sender of the note. We have to go back, Thomas said, his voice now filled with a new cold determination. We need to find out which of Ola Persson's close associates knows about that Saab 900 with the broken tail light, and who cared enough about Elin to mark the case with purple, and who had the audacity to involve Pishkol's daughter. My father, Marlin said, her voice soft, a thought she barely dared to voice. Did he know who the killer was? Is that why he left? Thomas looked at her. We're about to find out. Back to Björnsdal. We're going to arrest Ola Persson. Chapter 6. The Ice Clamp. The return journey to Björnsdal was faster and more frantic than the trip out. Marlin Schul's authority and Thomas Nyman's rage merged into a dangerous determination. It was 8:30 in the evening. The polar night was at its deepest. Marlin drove with her high beams on, their rays cutting fiercely into the constant snowfall. Björnsdal was a town that looked like it was sleeping. But Thomas now knew it was only pretending. The houses kept secrets in the gloom. "Where are we going?" Marlin asked, as they neared the edge of town. "To the sawmill," Thomas said, his voice sharp. "Ola is a creature of habit. He's either there now or heading home. The sawmill is his castle. It's best to confront him there where he can't run." Thomas knew the arrest of Ol Persson would not be well received by local police, especially by Marlin's regional bosses, but they were too far in to turn back. Marlin parked the patrol car out of sight of the sawmill, behind a stack of rusted, discarded machinery. The wind howled around the metal skeletons. "We do this by the book, Thomas," Marlin said. "You stay in the shadows. You are a civilian. I am the one who interrogates and arrests." "I understand," Thomas replied, but he knew he was too involved to stay in the background. His guilt was his weapon. They crept onto the sawmill grounds. Only one light was on, a faint yellow glow in Ola Persson's office. The rest of the large shed was a mass of shadow and parked machinery. As they got closer, Thomas pointed toward a small, snow-covered garage attached to the main building. "That's his private workshop," Thomas whispered. "If the car's there, he's there." Marlin nodded and pulled out her heavy flashlight. She took a deep breath, released the safety on her service weapon, and walked toward the office door. Thomas followed, staying in the shadow of the wood piles, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Marlin knocked loudly on the office window. No reaction. She knocked again, harder. "Ola Persson, police, open up." The light remained on, but there was no movement inside. "The door," Thomas said softly. Marlin tried the handle. Locked. She pulled out the spare key, one she carried as the sole police officer in the village. It took her a second to unlock it. She stepped inside, her flashlight beam illuminating the dark space. Thomas stood in the doorway, ready to intervene. The office was empty. A half-full cup of cold coffee sat on the desk. A radio played softly. Ola had been here recently. "He just left," Marlin concluded. She walked toward the workshop door leading to the garage. She opened the inner door. The smell of oil, old leather, and petrol hit them. Marlin swept her flashlight beam across the garage. The space was filled with broken equipment and, in the center, stood it. A dark, dated Saab 900. It was the witness's car. Thomas felt the adrenaline rush through his veins. He walked past Marlin and directed the beam at the back of the car. Snow had been brushed off the vehicle, but the lighting was clear. The left tail light was cracked and partially covered with a piece of black tape. Linus Renville had spoken the truth. Ola Persson's car was the car of the disappearance. "He's here," Thomas whispered. "He must be here somewhere." Suddenly, Marlin noticed something else. On the garage wall, on a workbench, lay a pile of tools, and in the corner, neatly folded, were work clothes and a heavy grey wool sweater. Marlin walked over to the sweater and picked it up. "It's freezing, Thomas. Why would he leave his sweater here?" Thomas noticed a thin, dark streak on the concrete floor, leading out from the workshop, under the large sliding door of the shed. "He went into the shed," Thomas said, walking toward the sliding door. "Wait, Nyman," Marlin called, but Thomas didn't listen. He grabbed the cold metal handle and pulled the heavy sliding door slightly open. The shed was a massive, dark, cathedral-like space, filled with the icy silence of 1,000 logs and inactive saws. There was no light, no movement. Thomas stepped inside, his flashlight held out in front of him. The air in the shed was terribly cold, but Thomas didn't feel cold. He felt hot with the anger that had been building for 20 years. "Ole," Thomas called out. His voice echoed off the walls, but the sound was quickly swallowed by the heavy stacks of timber. Marlin followed closely, her pistol drawn. "Don't shout, Thomas. He could be anywhere." As they walked past the massive industrial saw machine, Thomas suddenly stopped. He pointed to the floor, where the faint dark streak from the garage floor became clearer. It wasn't oil, it was blood. Fresh. "Marlin," Thomas said, "something has happened." They followed the blood trail. It led them along the rows of stacked logs. Shadows danced. The silence was now suffocating. At the far end of the shed, near the rear drainage door, the trail stopped. There lay Ole Persson. He was on the floor, sprawled out, a pool of blood beneath his head. His eyes were open, empty, and frozen in the darkness. His face was white, his beard congealed with ice crystals. But he had not been shot. A massive metal wood chisel had fallen next to him, and the blood came from a deep, brutal blow to the back of his head. "The perpetrator is still here," Marlin whispered, her breath a white cloud. Thomas knelt by Ole, his detective instincts instantly awake. He felt for the sawmill owner's pulse. "Dead," Thomas said, his voice surprisingly calm. "Maybe not 10 minutes ago. His body hasn't stiffened yet." Marlin swept the room with her flashlight. "There's no other exit, Thomas. We saw the sliding door closed. He's inside here, or we let him escape." Thomas's gaze fell on Ole's hand. His hand was tightly clenched around something. Thomas struggled to pry the dead man's fingers open. When he finally succeeded, he found a small folded piece of paper. It wasn't yellow, but white, fresh and clean. Marlin shone her light. Thomas unfolded it. The text was written in the same neat, schoolmasterly handwriting as the first note. "The lies are now resolved. You can find the purple ribbon where he buried it, on the 20th. Thomas's heart clenched. The perpetrator of Elin Vestergaard's murder was dead, but the sender of the note was alive, and they had just found a second note in the snow, this time in the victim's blood. "The 20th, Marlin whispered. 5 days from now." "What happens on the 20th? "That is the day of the winter solstice," Thomas said, "the longest night of the year, and the day 2 decades ago we officially called off the search for Elin Vestergaard. The culprit wasn't Ole Persson. Ole was merely one of the lies that needed to be resolved. The real culprit had waited 20 years, started the game with the yellow note, and now eliminated Ole Persson to prevent him from talking. They had found the perpetrator of the disappearance, but now they were looking at the perpetrator of a new, fresh murder. Thomas felt sick. They hadn't arrested Ole Persson. They had led him to his death. "We call the regional police," Marlin said, her voice trembling. "Now, we have a murder case, and we need a name. Who among Ole's close circle could be so calm, knew about the Saab, and had access to the tools in this sawmill?" Thomas looked at the white, clean, murderous note in his hand. The killer had murdered Ole Persson with something found right here in the sawmill. His gaze snapped back to the wall, to the folded grey wool sweater. "Let's first find out who knew Ole's car and his sawmill." "Marlin," Thomas said, now the chief inspector again. "And which of his close ones has a handwriting perfect for a Christmas card?" Chapter 7. The Penman. The hours following the discovery of Ole Persson's body were a whirlwind of bureaucracy and icy silence. Marlin Skuld had notified the regional police, but she had kept the details brief. No mention of the micro-archive, the yellow note, or Thomas's involvement other than that of a chance witness who visited the sawmill to check on his delivery. For the past 2 hours, Thomas had been the isolated forest ranger, sitting in the patrol car while the regional forensic unit, finally arrived from Luleå, did their work. By midnight, when the Kaamos made the darkness heaviest, the sawmill was cordoned off with yellow tape. Marlin climbed into the patrol car, her face tight with fatigue and frustration. She was still wearing her uniform, but she had unholstered her weapon. "They're taking over," Marlin said, her voice hoarse. "They are assuming a fight over money that got out of hand, or a drunken argument. They don't believe in killers who leave notes. I didn't give them the new note." Thomas nodded. The white note now lay, like the yellow one, safely in a plastic bag in his breast pocket. "Good. We work faster than them. The killer eliminated Ola to prevent a confession. That means the burial site of the purple ribbon is of great importance to the perpetrator. We have 5 days until the solstice." "Who is it, Thomas?" Marlin asked. "Who could be so cold-blooded with a chisel and write so neatly?" Thomas pulled up the photos of the notes on his phone. "This is not the handwriting of a killer in a panic. This is someone who writes often and neatly. An administrative position, perhaps, and someone who knew Ola well enough to know he was often at his office late at night and that the shed sliding door was rarely locked. They needed to map out Ola Person's inner circle, family, close employees, and anyone who had access to the sawmill and the Saab 900. Ola was divorced," Marlin began, turning up the heater. "His wife, Ingrid Persson, lives in Haparanda, not here. But his daughter, Clara Persson, lives in Björnsdal. She works as a primary school teacher." "A teacher," Thomas murmured. "That fits the handwriting. Clara might also know about the purple scarf. She was at the same school as Elin at the time." "There were also a couple of employees," Marlin continued, reading names from an old, dusty notepad she kept in her bag. "Sven Hedlund is the foreman, and Erik Jansson, a warehouse worker. Both have been at the sawmill for over 20 years, but they are both rough workers. The handwriting doesn't fit." Thomas thought about the Saab. Ola's car was old. Who else would have driven it? "What about the Eriksson girls?" Thomas asked. "The disappeared girls. Sarah worked at the bar, Emma at the sawmill. Was there a link between them and Clara Persson?" Marlin shook her head. "Not officially, but we know Ola fired Emma shortly before she disappeared, and Ola's Saab was there at the sawmill. Maybe Clara used the car sometimes." "We're going to Clara Persson," Thomas decided. "She is the only one who combines the handwriting, the community link, and direct access to Ola. And she is the daughter of Elin Vestergaard's killer." They drove through the dark, silent centre of Björnsdal. Clara Persson lived in one of the better-maintained row houses, a spot of light in the darkness. Marlin parked the car 2 houses away. She placed her mobile phone on the dashboard holder and took a photo of the yellow note on the screen. "This is our alibi," Marlin said. "I'll say I'm here to question her about her father, as the last person to see him. I will discreetly ask her to provide a handwritten statement, a condolence, or a formal declaration. Then we compare it to the notes. You observe her reaction to the murder and to the word purple." Marlin knocked on the door. Clara Persson opened it. She was a woman in her early 40s with neat, short blonde hair. She wore warm pajama bottoms and a thick cardigan. Her eyes were red and swollen. "Officer Schold," Clara said softly. "I heard something happened to Dad at the sawmill. The radio reported it." "Mrs. Persson, I am sorry to bring you this news," Marlin said, her voice now official and compassionate. "Your father, Ola Persson, has passed away. It appears he was the victim of an accident in the shed, caused by one of the heavy tools." Clara's face crumpled with grief and shock, but her tears were already there. "No," she whispered. "No, that can't be. I just spoke to him tonight. He was always so careful." Thomas remained at the threshold, his face in the shadow. He observed her. The grief seemed genuine. She was completely broken. "I have a few questions, Mrs. Persson," Marlin continued, remaining on the threshold. "We need to establish an accurate timeline of his last hours. Do you know when you last saw or spoke to him?" Clara wiped her eyes. "Tonight, around 7. I called to ask if he knew where my purple duvet cover was. I had lent it to him for the cabin. He said he was about to close up the sawmill and head home." Thomas's breath caught. Purple. She had used the word herself, spontaneously. A dead end? Or was it a code word in their family? Marlin remained calm and asked a formal question. "Ola's car, the old Saab. Did you ever use it? Or did you have a spare key for it? We need to tow it for forensic examination." Clara shook her head. "No, Ola was very possessive about the Saab. He always said he was keeping that car for something special. He never lent it to anyone." Thomas stepped forward, out of the shadows. "Mrs. Persson, you are a teacher, correct? Do you know if your father had any enemies? Or have you noticed anything unusual lately? Something purple, perhaps, that was out of place?" Clara looked at Thomas, and in her eyes he saw a moment of recognition, but no fear. You are Thomas Nyman, the forest ranger. You were the detective back then." "That's right," Thomas said. Clara's lip trembled. "I haven't seen anything unusual, Mr. Nyman. But I want to ask you, could you please give me a formal statement about how he passed away? I want to send a condolence card to his sister. I want it to be neat." Marlin seized the opportunity. She pulled out her small notepad. "Of course, Mrs. Persson. If you would kindly write your statement neatly and in your own words on this pad, we can start the official process." Clara took the pad and pen. Thomas and Marlin watched as, with a trembling hand, but with a strikingly neat and measured handwriting, she began to write. When Clara finished, she handed over the pad. Her hands were icy cold. Marlin took the pad, and Thomas looked over her shoulder. Though the hand trembled, the letters were clear, rounded, and perfectly aligned. It looked exactly like the handwriting on the 2 notes. Clara Persson had access to the sawmill, could have seen the Saab, and she was the daughter of the man who was just found in his own blood, with a note on his body, and she had called her father tonight asking about a purple blanket. Thomas looked at Marlin. The penman, the killer, was sitting right across from them. "Thank you, Mrs. Persson," Marlin said, her face a mask. "We will take our leave now. We will keep you updated." They left the house, the wind cutting at their faces. They got into the car. "The handwriting, Thomas," Marlin whispered, holding the notepad. "It's her handwriting. It's her. She killed Ola, and she sent the notes." "No," Thomas said, feeling Ola's blood and the white note in his breast pocket. The handwriting is hers. The truth is hers. But she didn't kill Ola. Marlin looked at him disbelievingly. What do you mean? The blood trail, the chisel, the car, the notes. The grief was a lie. She knew he was dead. The grief was real, Marlin. She is broken. She sent the note to us to lead us to Ola. She knew Ola killed Aylin, but Clara loves her father and wanted the police to do it. We saved Ola from prison, and the real killer was one step ahead of us. They were with Ola while we were in Luleå. Who then? The sweater in the garage, Marlin. The grey wool sweater. It was not Ola's, and Clara said Ola was possessive about the Saab, but she knew he was keeping it for something special. This isn't a fight over money or an accident. This is revenge planned over 20 years. The penman wanted us to arrest Ola. The killer prevented that. Thomas looked into the darkness of the forest. We have 5 days to find that purple ribbon, Marlin. And the only person who knew Clara would visit her father tonight to ask about that purple blanket is the one laughing in the shadows right now. Chapter 8. The Grey Sweater and the Alibis. Thomas and Marlin drove the patrol car to Thomas's cabin. They couldn't stay at Marlin's apartment in Björnsdal anymore. The regional police had now taken over the station. Thomas's cabin, remote and unofficial, was their only safe base. Marlin was still in a state of shock. The sudden separation of the perpetrator into two roles, the penman and the killer, was difficult to process after the direct evidence against Clara. So you're saying Clara wrote the notes? Marlin began, as Thomas stoked the stove, the warm, dry air chasing the coal from their clothes. She is the penman. She knew her father murdered Elin Vestergaard and used us, via the detail of the purple scarf, to get him arrested. But someone else beat us to it. Exactly, Thomas said, his eyes fixed on the dancing fire. Clara wanted justice through the legal system, or perhaps she wanted to end her own guilt. She knew we would find Ola. But the killer had a different kind of justice in mind. Ola was killed with a brutal blow, not arrested. Marlin pulled out Clara Persson's notepad and placed it next to the photo of the yellow note. The handwriting is identical. Clara is the source of the truth. And the purple duvet cover? Thomas asked. A brilliant cover story, Marlin replied. She called her father at 7 o'clock. She asked about something purple, her way of warning him that purple was in play, or checking if he was home. She was establishing an alibi while knowing he was dead, or about to die. Or, Thomas interrupted, she called to check if he was alone. She wanted to be sure he was at the sawmill in case the police, us, came there. She wanted to keep Ola contained there. But we were too late, Marlin. Thomas walked over to the dining table and spread out a faded topographical map of Björnsdal and the surrounding forest. We need to profile the killer, Thomas said. We have the Saab 900, the sawmill, and the grey wool sweater. The culprit had to know that Ola was guilty of Aylin's disappearance, know about the Saab with the broken tail light, know that Ola kept his Saab for something special, perhaps to move the Eriksson girls' bodies, have access to the sawmill and the tools, be there early enough to kill Ola between 7:05 p.m., Clara's call, and 8:30 p.m., our arrival. Thomas tapped the name Sven Hedlund on Marlin's notes. Sven Hedlund, the foreman, Thomas read. Long-time employee, knew Ola's routines, knew the sawmill. But does the handwriting fit? And did he know about the Saab? Unlikely, Marlin said. Sven is a simple man, and we have to account for the sweater. The sweater, Thomas repeated. A grey wool sweater. A man at a sawmill would wear a sweater like that. But why did he leave it behind? If it was a planned murder, he wouldn't have left. Traces. It was rushed. Thomas's gaze fell on the map of the area. Why would the killer make it so easy for us by killing Ole and then providing us with Clara's warning note, giving us the location of the purple ribbon? They want us to find it. Marlene took the white note from the plastic. She read it aloud. You can find the purple ribbon where he buried it, on the 20th. The purple ribbon, Marlene said. That's Elin's scarf. If Ole murdered her, he buried her somewhere. And the place where he buried the ribbon is the key to the grave. Thomas looked at the map, his gaze fixed on the area around the Björnsdal, the frozen lake. We need a place that had special meaning for Ole, a place where he would keep a secret. And we need the car, the Saab 900. The Saab is the evidence now, on its way to Luleå, Marlene sighed. No, Thomas said with a dark grin. I know the regional police. They are towing the Saab to a closed cold warehouse in Luleå. We have a few hours before they arrange that. We can intercept them. The car itself is the key to the burial site. Ole kept it for something special. What if the car led him there? What do you mean? Ole was a sawmill owner. He was involved in logging. A killer who wants to dump a body chooses a wilderness spot. But Ole would choose a spot he could reach with a vehicle, even after heavy snowfall. The Saab was kept special, perhaps because it was the only vehicle that could handle the route to Elin's grave. We have to intercept the Saab, Marlene concluded. She grabbed her jacket. What about the grey sweater then? Who are we looking at? The sweater is the most hurried mistake, Thomas said. The killer was wearing it, killed Ole with a chisel, perhaps got injured, and fled in a panic through the shed. He left the sweater behind because it was soiled or stained. So the killer is someone who normally does not work at the sawmill, but had access and kept the sweater there. Or the sweater is not the killer's, but Ole's alibis. Thomas recalled the details from the Eriksson girls' files. Emma was fired by Ole. Sarah saw an old man with a purple hat the night she disappeared. We need to question Clara about Ole's personal relationships, Thomas said. Are there other close associates who would fit into that grey sweater? Maybe a lover? Ole had no official partner, Marlene said. But rumours in Björnsdal suggest he had an affair with a woman who works at the library, Lena Stenberg. She is a quiet, unassuming, middle-aged woman. She could have the handwriting. Lena Stenberg, Thomas wrote down the name. She has the intellectual capacity for the note. And if she had an affair with Ole, she knew his secrets, his sawmill, and his Saab. And she might know about Elin, Marlene added, the pieces falling into place now. Librarians remember everything. Thomas stood up. No, Lena Stenberg is another pawn. The killer is the person closest to Ole with the most to lose. Clara knew about the scarf. Lena Stenberg might have known about the car. But the killer wanted Ole dead. Why? Thomas picked up the map and pointed to a remote section of the forest on the west side of the lake, where the roads were impassable for normal cars. We don't have time for profiles, Thomas said. We have to intercept the Saab, Marlene. We have to find the car before the regional police confiscate it. Then the car will lead us to the purple ribbon, and if the car leads us there, the killer isn't far behind. What are you suggesting? The tow truck hasn't left Björnsdal yet. We drive to meet them. We create an incident, and we retrieve that Saab. Marlin looked at him, her eyes burning in the shadow of the cabin. You are suggesting I commit the unlawful seizure of evidence, Thomas. No, Thomas said, a sharp smile playing on his lips. You are suggesting that you secure the car for further local investigation into the murder of Ola Persson. The regional officers will be angry, but they won't stop you. You are the local authority. Chapter 9. The Interception. The clock showed 1:30 in the morning. Marlin Schul's patrol car sped down the E4, the only route out of Björnsdal. The wind had picked up and the snow was getting heavier, transforming the road into a narrow, glistening tunnel. Thomas had the map of Björnsdal on his lap. He had calculated where the regional police tow truck should be located. They're slow, Thomas muttered. They see this as routine. A rural murder, a body, towing a car. And I see this as the last piece of evidence that tells us where Elin Vestergaard lies, Marlin said, her gaze fixed on the white road. We can't find Ola's killer if we don't know where his first victim is buried. After 20 minutes, they spotted the flashing red lights in the distance, a tow truck moving slowly through the snow, with the dark shape of Ola Persson's Saab 900 hooked up. There he is, Thomas said, his voice a low vibration of anticipation. Marlin took a deep breath and flicked on the flashing lights of her patrol car. The blue light filled the cabin. She didn't brake, but accelerated, cutting off the tow truck's path. The tow truck driver, a man with a weary face and a beard full of icicles, waved his arms. Marlin stepped resolutely out of the car. Her uniform gave her instant authority. Thomas remained in the car. Officer Schuld, Björnsdal Police, Marlin said, her voice loud and clear in the cold, rushing silence. You must stop immediately. I am taking custody of this vehicle. The driver climbed out of his truck, his breath forming a cloud of steam. What? Are you crazy? The regional police requested this vehicle as evidence for the murder case in Björnsdal. I'm on my way to Luleå. This vehicle is crucial for the local murder investigation. The Persson case is being handled by us until the regional unit fully takes over command. I have ordered that the car be returned to the sawmill for a reconstruction of the deceased's movements. You can contact the dispatch center, but you stop here and now. Marlin spoke with a calmness and authority that impressed Thomas. She played the game perfectly, local sovereignty against regional bureaucracy. The driver, clearly unwilling to engage in a legal battle in the freezing cold, sighed. Okay, officer, but I'm unhooking the tow bar and leaving. This isn't my problem. Within 10 minutes, Ola Persson's dark Saab 900 was back on four wheels, right in the middle of the E4. Marlin and Thomas were alone with the killer's car. They drove the Saab to Thomas's cabin. The cold, old engine started surprisingly well. The car smelled like Ola, a mixture of diesel, wet wool, and cigarettes. In the safe cocoon of the cabin, with the Saab parked in the shed area, they began a forensic analysis of the vehicle. What are we looking for? Marlin asked, pulling on heavy gloves. We are looking for the special reason why Ola kept this car, Thomas said. Not Elin's murder. That was an unexpected event. but the dumping of the Eriksson girls. He used this car to move them. Otherwise, he wouldn't have guarded it so anxiously. Thomas focused on the underside of the car. The chassis and wheel arches were muddy and scratched, evidence that Ola often drove off-road, but the tires were the most telling. "Look here, Marlin," Thomas said, aiming his light at the front right wheel. "These are mud patterns and small stones that don't match the normal forest roads. These are stones from a paved driveway, likely unused. The Saab has been in a very specific place that was heavy and unused for a long time." Marlin directed her light at the back seat. "There's nothing here, no traces." "Check the trunk," Thomas said. The trunk was empty, except for an old mud-covered blanket and a spare tire. Thomas pulled the blanket away. Underneath lay a thin layer of sand and gravel, as if something heavy had been dragged. Thomas narrowed his eyes. "This is it. This is the burial site. There is specific gravel in the trunk, Marlin. Ola must have driven to a place where he needed to use sand and gravel to help the car out of the snow. A remote place with a unique soil composition." Marlin touched the sand. It was dark and loamy, different from the light sand she knew from the local roads. "We need to check the map," Marlin said. "We're looking for a place that meets all these criteria: remote, difficult to access, and requiring special gravel to get there." They spread the map of the area over the Saab's hood, and Thomas analyzed the soil conditions. The map shows abandoned sand and gravel depots on the west side of the lake, near the old miners' cabins. That could be the unused driveway, but we need another clue: the purple ribbon location. Thomas aimed his light at the Saab's console. There, in the dust of the dashboard, he saw something. A very small scratch, barely visible. It was a P and an L. The letters were carved into the dashboard, almost hidden by the dust. "PL," Thomas said softly. The initials of a person, or a location, Marlin thought. "PL. There are no prominent locations in Björnsdal with those initials, but..." She looked at the console. "There is a noticeable scratch on the radio here, Thomas. Someone was very angry at this car, or wanted to leave a message." Thomas wiped the dust away. The scratch on the radio was deep and hasty. "PL," Thomas repeated. Marlin's face suddenly brightened. "The miners' cabins. Thomas, when Aileen disappeared, she was volunteering at the retirement home. She often brought food to an old man, Per Larsen. He lived in a cabin on the west side of the lake, right near the old depots. He died a few months after Aileen's disappearance, of natural causes. The cabin was closed." "Per Larsen," Thomas said. "The cabin of Per Larsen, the man Aileen knew. A remote spot, difficult to reach, near gravel depots. And Ola knew that place too, because he knew everyone in the area." "It makes sense," Marlin said. "If Ola lured Aileen there, to a place where she felt safe, and buried her there, the car would only be able to travel that route with the help of that gravel, and the initials PL are the clue to the burial site." "The purple scarf is there, Marlin," Thomas said, "and probably the bodies of the Eriksson girls. And the author of the notes, Clara, knew about this place through her father, or she followed Ola there. The killer, the third person, also knew it, and used Ola's car and the sawmill to commit the murders and erase the traces." The clock now showed almost 2 in the morning. The solstice was still 4 days away. "We can't wait until daylight," Thomas said. "We go now. We drive this Saab to Per Larsen's cabin. The car is our guide. And the killer? Thomas took a deep breath, the cold air of the cabin stinging his lungs. If the killer knows we found Ola, and that we now have the note leading to the burial site, they will be there. They murdered Ola Persson to lead us to the purple ribbon, and to prevent Ola from talking about who shared the Saab with him. Who would have driven the Saab, Thomas? Thomas looked at the map. Someone Ola trusted, someone who took the sawmill and the Saab for granted, and someone whose life was threatened by Clara's notes. Sven Hedlund, the foreman, is still the most likely. He knew the Saab, or Lena Stenberg, the librarian and Ola's mistress, who is now endangered by Clara's notes. Lena Stenberg, Marlene said, her eyes narrowed. If she knew Ola murdered the Eriksson girls, and she was blackmailing him for it, Clara's note would have driven her to desperation. She would kill Ola before he revealed her betrayal. The killer killed Ola for 2 reasons, Thomas concluded. To prevent him from talking, and to give us the location of the purple ribbon, as if it were a victory. We are going to Per Larsen's cabin now. They got into the Saab 900. The engine of the killer's car ran with a deep throbbing sound. They drove into the darkness, heading for the hidden cabin on the edge of the frozen lake, where 20 years of lies lay buried. Chapter 10. The Burial Site and the Confrontation. Ola Persson's Saab 900 ploughed through the untouched snow of the dirt road leading west of Björnsdal Lake. The drive was slow and sputtering. Without the all-wheel drive of the patrol car, the Saab, despite its reputation, was tested. Ola had been right. This car was special, but only for the most necessary routes. Thomas was behind the wheel. The smell of the dead man and old smoke hung heavily in the cabin. Marlene scanned the trees with her flashlight, the beam piercing the darkness. "It's here on the left," Thomas said, his voice a raw rasp. The road was barely visible, a narrow cut between the pine trees. "The gravel depot is there, and then the cabin." They turned onto the unused side road. The wheels spun, the engine roared. Thomas felt the gravel under the tires, exactly the dark, loamy mixture he had found in the trunk. Ola had cleared this path, or at least kept it accessible, for the darkest of purposes. After about 5 minutes, they reached a clearing. A small, dilapidated wooden cabin stood there, Per Larsen's cabin. It was surrounded by a thick layer of snow. It looked as if no one had been there in years, but that wasn't true. Marlene aimed her light at the cabin. The door was ajar, and there were fresh footprints in the snow. Large boots, the same kind seen in Ola's shed. "He's here," Marlene whispered. She grabbed her pistol. Thomas stopped the Saab and turned off the engine and the lights. The silence that followed was deafening, interrupted by the soft ticking of the cooling engine. They stepped out of the car cautiously. "The killer knew we would follow the notes," Thomas said, as the Saab's door hinges creaked. "This is a trap. They want us to find the graves." They walked toward the cabin. The wind whipped the snow around their ankles. "There's no light in the cabin," Marlene whispered. "But the tracks don't lead there. They lead to the back of the cabin." They followed the footprints, which led along the outside wall of the cabin, to a spot where the trees grew closer together. There, at the edge of the tree line, the ground was disturbed. There was an uneven mound of earth and snow, where the freezing point had barely been reached in recent days. Marlene knelt down and brushed away the snow. The ground was covered in places by a thin wooden plank. "There's more than one grave," Marlin said, her voice trembling from the cold and the shock. "They are all here." Thomas knelt beside her. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the cold, definitive realization of the failure 20 years ago. Thomas reached his hand into the earth, ignoring the freezing cold. His fingers hit something soft, something textile. He pulled at it. It was a piece of purple fabric, preserved in the cold, loamy soil. It was soft, hand-knitted. The purple ribbon, Elin Vestergaard's scarf. Thomas held the piece of fabric, the evidence of Elin's death, and the motive behind the whole violent game. Suddenly, they heard a sound behind them, a soft crunch of frozen grass. They both jumped up, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. There stood he, or she, a figure in a heavy dark coat, face hidden in the shadow of a hood, and in the figure's hand they held a wooden rifle, the kind often used by hunters in the remote wilderness. "Let it go, Thomas," a voice rang out. It was a low, sharp voice, distorted by the cold. "Let go of the scarf." "Police," Marlin yelled, aiming her pistol. "Drop the weapon, now." The figure didn't move. Thomas recognized the stance. It was tense, calculated. "You shouldn't have found it," the figure said. "You should have arrested Ola. Then justice would have prevailed, and I would have been free. Now I have to bury the truth with you." "You're the killer," Thomas said. "You killed Ola with the chisel at the sawmill. You used the Saab. Who are you?" "You know who I am, Detective Nyman. You should have known 20 years ago, but you saw nothing. You only saw your own failure." The figure stepped out of the shadow, and Marlin's flashlight caught the face. It wasn't the foreman, Sven Hedlund, nor was it the librarian, Lena Stenberg. It was Clara Persson, the penman. Her face was ashen with cold and madness. She wore the heavy grey wool sweater under her coat, the one found in the garage. "Clara," Thomas said, shocked. "You are the penman and the killer." "I am the Avenger," Clara said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I wrote the notes to lead you to him. But when I called him, and he laughed about my purple duvet cover, I knew you would be too late. He would get away. He would bury the truth about Elin, Sarah, and Emma, and I couldn't allow that." "But why?" Marlin asked, keeping her pistol aimed. "Why you, Clara?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Because I was Elin. I was her best friend. I saw him lure her away. I knew he kept the car for things like this. And for 20 years, I watched him become the most powerful man in town, while I had the killer in my own home." "The Saab," Thomas said, a bitter realization hitting him. The car wasn't to move them. The Saab was your alibi. "Of course," Clara replied with a bitter smile. "I drove that car, Thomas. I was the one who helped Ola hide her body the night Elin disappeared. I was 12 and afraid. I drove that Saab while he buried Elin in the woods. And I waited 20 years to bring it to light. But he had to die when I knew you were coming for him." "And the sweater?" Marlin asked. "I borrowed it," Clara said, her gaze clouded. "From Sven Hedlund. He had an appointment with Ola last night about the payroll. I knew he would be at the sawmill. I killed him with his own tool." Clara raised the rifle. "I will not go to jail. And I will not let this secret be revealed by the police either." "Good, drop the weapon, Clara," Marlene screamed. But Clara squeezed her eyes shut. "The lies are resolved." The moment Clara's finger moved to the trigger, Thomas acted. He threw the clump of earth with the purple scarf directly into her face. The rifle went off. The shot tore through the icy night. Marlin didn't shoot. She lunged. The flash of her flashlight showed she had moved. Thomas ducked behind a log. The bullet whizzed past his ear. When Thomas looked up, Marlin was wrestling with Clara. The rifle had fallen. The two women rolled on the icy ground, fighting over Eileen's purple ribbon. Thomas ran toward them. He grabbed Clara's arms. The sweater, the neat Clara, the desperate avenger. She was strong. Her madness gave her strength. But Thomas and Marlin were too. They overpowered her. Marlin clicked the handcuffs onto the wrists of the killer's daughter, the avenger of her friend. Marlin stood up, her breathing heavy. She looked at Thomas. "We have the killer of Olle Persson," Marlin said, "and we have the burial site of Elin Vestergaard." Thomas Nyman nodded, squeezing the piece of purple scarf in his hand. The cold case was closed, but at a terrible price. The darkness of Björnsdal had demanded its vengeance. Chapter 11. The Light of the Solstice. The rest of the night vanished in a haze of activity. The arrival of Marlin Shaw's patrol car with a handcuffed Clara Persson and the killer's car, the Saab 900, shocked the regional police in Björnsdal into action. Thomas and Marlin spent the remainder of the early morning hours sketching the scene at Per Larsson's cabin, while regional forensic teams took over. The snow had stopped, and the sky began, despite the early hour, to glow with a soft, promising grey. The solstice, the day the darkness will begin to recede, was only a couple of days away. As the sun slowly rose, finally breaking through the cold, bright Kaamos, with a single ray on the horizon, the graves were opened. Thomas and Marlin stood at a distance, watching in silence as the forensic team removed layer after layer of frozen earth. They found the evidence Clara had tried to bury. First, they found the remains of Elin Vestergaard. She lay in her winter clothes, her bones fragile, the small purple ribbon, the rest of the scarf, resting beside her. Then, deeper in the earth, they found the bodies of the Eriksson girls, Sarah and Emma. Like Elin, they had been buried in a hasty, shallow pit. Thomas felt a strange mixture of relief and overwhelming sadness. The bodies had been found. The families would finally have peace. Marlin stood beside him, her face tight, but her eyes soft. 20 years, Marlin whispered, and they were here all along, near a man Elin trusted. Olle used the place of Elin's friend to hide his other murders, Thomas said. He was the man with the purple hat that Sarah Eriksson saw. He used the colour of Elin's scarf as a signature in his terrible work. He kept the Saab because it was the only evidence that could lead him to the spot, or that he could use to reach the spot. Clara's motive was revenge, but also revealing the truth, Marlin said. She knew she was complicit through her silence, and by being in that car with Olle that night. She could only find peace by showing the complete truth. Olle as the killer, the graves, and her own part in it. The regional chief, a man with a stern grey face, sought out Thomas and Marlin. He was furious about the interception of the Saab, but he couldn't ignore the results. "Officer Skold," the chief said, his voice low and formal. "You violated the rules, but you solved 3 cold cases and directly solved a murder case. We will document your actions as exceptional but necessary in the report. Your career will take a hit because of this, but also a flying start. He turned to Thomas. And you, Thomas Nyman, you have repaid your debt. The press across the country will know your name tomorrow. What will you do now? Thomas looked at the frozen lake. The burden of Eileen's death and his professional failure had finally been lifted from his shoulders. I'm going back to the cabin, Thomas said. My work as a ranger awaits. I have trees to cut. Marlin walked with Thomas to the edge of the forest. The Saab, Thomas said. They will tow the car away, but the tyres will provide the proof that Ola also transported the bodies of Sarah and Emma Eriksson with the Saab. Clara has confessed to everything, Thomas, Marlin said. She admitted to killing Ola, and she also admitted that she drove the Saab that night in 2005 to move Eileen's body under duress from her father. She was an accomplice, a victim, and an avenger all in one. Marlin looked at him with a serious yet grateful gaze. You closed the case, Thomas, and you showed me that Björnsdal isn't just a layer of ice. There are people who want to break the ice. Break it, Marlin, Thomas replied. Become the officer your father should have been. Keep digging. Thomas Nyman took the 2 plastic bags from his breast pocket, the yellow note and the white, blood-stained note. I don't need these anymore, Thomas said. The message has been delivered. I kept them. Will you keep them? Marlin took the 2 notes, the penman, the killer, the lieutenant, and the detective, all connected by a few pieces of paper. I will archive them, Marlin said, as proof that it was the town's fault, not yours. Thomas nodded. He turned and walked toward his cabin. He didn't need the Saab anymore. He walked, his feet finding a new rhythm in the cold, crunching snow. The sun broke through the clouds, the first weak light of the solstice. A few days later, Thomas was back at his cabin. The Christmas cards from the Eriksson family had been replaced by messages of thanks. He had missed the silence of the woods. He sat by the fire. His phone rang. It was Marlin. They've taken Clara to the regional hospital for psychological evaluation, Marlin reported. She's been charged with the murder of Ola Persson and complicity in the burials. The media are going wild. And the burial site? The graves are empty. The girls are home now. The case is officially closed. And my father, Marlin added, her voice softer. He called me. He said he was proud of me. Thomas smiled. That's good to hear, Marlin. What will you do now, Thomas? She asked. Me? I'm going to cut trees, Thomas replied. But not the old, sick trees. The new ones. The saplings. The future of the forest. I'm staying here, Marlin. But not in the dark anymore. Thomas hung up. He looked outside. The snow glistened. The Kaamos had broken. It was time to bury his past and care for the living. The silence of the woods was no longer a prison. It was now a sanctuary.